In this fourth session on the book of 1 Timothy, we are ready for chapter 3, verses 8 through 16, dealing with the deacon. Now, we find that in chapter 1, after the Apostle Paul addressed himself to Timothy, who is serving as the pastor of the church in Ephesus, he is instructing him as to proper behavior and conduct in the assembly. First of all, in chapter 1, he tells him not to allow anyone to teach any other teaching. Chapter 2, he says to have a prayer for all men everywhere, as well as those who are in leadership and authority over us. And he says it's to be men who lead in that prayer, men who have a holy life to be lifted up before God, but women are to be holy also. Now in chapter 3, he defines for us what it is that constitutes a holy life. And anyone who's to be in the position of a bishop or a pastor or elder, which is all speaking of the same person, they are to have a life of holiness, as we saw in the first 7 verses. Now beginning in verse 8, he says, "Likewise must the deacons be grave." Now when he says likewise, he is saying in the same manner in which we talked about the bishop or elder or pastor, so we say also about the deacon. In other words, whatever is the qualification of the pastor is for the deacon, and whatever is mentioned for the deacon is for the pastor. They're reciprocal, one for the other. Likewise, just as that is, so is this. Now when he said, must the deacons be grave, what is a deacon, and what does a deacon do if he deacons? Now, we need to know just what a deacon is and how the word is used before we go on with the study to these qualifications. There are many concepts running rampant in churches across the world as to what a deacon is, whether they're necessary or not. But it is in the Word of God, and they're to have the same qualifications as that of a preacher. Now, the English word deacon in the singular is found only 2 times in your New Testament. The word deacons in the plural is found only 3 times. That's a grand total of only 5 times the word deacon appears in your English Bible. I'm talking about the English King James Version. Now, 5 times, as much as we talk about the deacons, we would think that the Bible is full of that word. However, we do find that the Greek word diakonos, which is translated as deacon, is found 30 times in the New Testament. That's still not a lot of times for a word to be found. 30 times. Now, only 3 times is this word used as the official designation of the office of a deacon in the church. Only 3 times is that word used as that official designation in all of the New Testament. Now, in all other passages, it is used in its simple etymological sense of a ministering servant. Now, some form of that Greek word, though, like diakonane, diakonian, and what have you, is found from 85 to 90 times in the Scriptures and is translated with some form of the word serve, such as serve, serving, servant, serveth, or some form of the word minister, such as minister, ministering, ministered, ministereth, or some form of those 2 words. Now, the Greek word carries the meaning as follows. It means to run on errands, to be an attendant, to be a waiter, to be of aid, to be of service, to wait upon others as a host, as a friend, or as a teacher. Now that is the way the word is used throughout the New Testament. And so that tells us what a deacon does when he deacons. If he is deaconing, he's running on errands, he's being an attendant to others, he is being a waiter upon others, of aid to others, of service to others. He's waiting upon others as a host, as a friend, or as a teacher. Now, I want you to see several things before we go into the exposition of this passage concerning the qualifications. First of all, I want you to see this meaning that I just gave you, the meaning of the word deacon as illustrated from the Scriptures. So we'll turn back to begin in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 4 and verse 11. And all of these words we're going to look at now are words that are some form of that word diakonos. Not the word diakonos, but diakonane, diakonia, and some other form of the word diakonos, and which means basically a ministering servant. Some form of the word minister or servant is used. Now in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 11, we find that angels deeked to Jesus Christ. That is, they rendered a ministering service unto him. Now, after Jesus Christ was tempted the 40 days and never sinned, then the Word of God says in Matthew 4:11, then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and deeked unto him. The word ministered is a form of that word diakonos. So the angels came and deeked. So it's rendering a ministering service to be of help and aid to another. Then, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8 and verse 15, we find that Peter's mother-in-law deeked in her home. Now in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 15, let's go back to verse 14. It says, and when Jesus was come to Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and deeked unto them. She ministered unto them. She served them tea and coffee or cookies or whatever it was they served in those days. So she rendered a ministering service unto them, waiting upon them as the hostess in her home. So there was deaking, rendering a service to another. Then in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15 and verse 41, we find that there were a group of women who deeked unto Jesus Christ. Now in 1541, let's go back to verse 40. There were also women looking on afar off, among whom was Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the Less, and of Joseph and Salome, who also when he was in Galilee followed him and deeked unto him, and many other women which came up with him unto Jerusalem. So we find that there were several women who deeked unto Jesus Christ.